Hello everybody, how is everybody doing? Well, in this video we are going to talk about an interesting thing. Let's begin. Preparation. A complete range of opinions about people, situation, etc. is going to be presented in this video. So I hope you pay attention. We will discuss from one extreme to the opposite in this consideration. Sorry about the misspelling of the word one. To talk about the penal codification system is to talk about the new dogmatic trends and political criminal guidelines. When we talk about dogmatic trends, we are talking about something that cannot be proven. A dogma is a belief that a religious leader, political leader can tell you, but not necessarily that dogma needs to be justified or stand any objection. You get what I mean? For example, I tell you, in this year happened this in heaven or on earth, and I don't give you enough evidence for what I'm telling you. In the case of religious leaders, some religious leaders are like that. So, new dogmatic trends. Keep that in mind. Let's continue. Which in one way or another have been systematically reflected in our criminal codification system. It's fair enough to have this in our codification system, criminal codification system. Someone who is dogmatic is completely certain of their beliefs and expects other people to accept them without arguing. As I said at the beginning, someone dogmatic can be a religious leader, a political leader. Most of the time, these dogmatic people is someone who is very professional, convincing people, persuade them to do what he wants without giving any excuse or any justification at all. We've got this type of people. For example, Adolf Hitler was a very dogmatic person. He had that power to convince other people about what is right and what is wrong, what we need and what we want. Anyone can be like that. You just need power to convince other people that you are right. I would address that in a future video. This penal codification system must reflect historical social content. Like, for example, 150 years ago, we didn't have any law for flights, for planes, but nowadays we have them. So right now, airplanes are regulated by the Congress or by the President or by judicial power. They are regulated. 100 years ago, there were no criminal law about wearing the seatbelt in the car. It was an option to wear the seatbelt or not. Some cars don't even have a seatbelt. I'm talking about 100 years ago. So imagine how historical content the codification system must be. And I believe this applies to all societies, all countries around the world. In addition, the concrete expressions of the legitimate demands that arise in a given society must be faced. The criminal codification system must constitute an ordered whole, a homogeneous and systematically coherent normative body in its basic lines or guidelines that guide it. Oh yes, we are. The society should always pay attention to what is happening around the society, around the rank and file citizens of the country. Let's move on. Taking as a maximum respect for human dignity in accordance with the trends that inspire a liberal and democratic liberal law. Democracy. Democracy is so important when we talk about law. For example, in the United Kingdom, we have Queen Elizabeth II, who always respects the Constitution. Always. Even though he might disagree or agree with something. I say might because the sovereign of the United Kingdom is not entitled to take a position. But they have the power. For example, they've got the power to dissolve the parliament. They've got that power. But I'm talking about the Queen. She's so respectful to democracy, to the Constitution. For example, in 2016, the UK voted that they would escape the European agreement, the European Union. People voted to leave the European Union. I know many people that says that this is completely correct, but there are others who says that's correct. So what is the position of the Queen? Again, she's respectful of democracy and the Constitution. Okay, I'm talking about human dignity. I made a video about Peru. You can search it on this channel. It's quite interesting, that video that I prepared. I talk as a whole about the rights that you may have in Peru, sorry. I explain it as a whole. I'm not a professional, I'm not an expert, I'm not a college student, but all my investigation, I always try to share it with the audience. Let's move on. Which is linked to the principle of minimum intervention expressed in the exclusive protection of legal assets worthy of criminal protection. Okay, you have it there. No more need for explanation about that. The 1991 Criminal Code. 1991. I was 6 years old in 1991, and things were different from what they are nowadays. Everything I learned in school is law for me, not changing of the teachings of my primary and high school teachings. They were more decent. They were not wicked or partial to one way of thinking, rather neutral about everything. In 1991, what was education about when I was a child? You really were in fear of the head teacher and the teachers. I remember that in 1991 I had a head teacher really scolded the students. So the students were really afraid of her. And I was afraid of her too. Believe me, it was like I, I shivered as soon as I saw her, and I always wanted to be approved in front of her. I remember, I tell you my experience, I remember that one day we were given an examination, and I can remember that I was innocent about examinations, and I saw a question in the examination, and I said, "Hey teacher, please come in. This question is the same as it is in the book," and I showed the book what the question was. And the teacher eh, grabbed my book from my hands and she hit me in the head with the book. And I said, "Why she does this?" And I later understood that it was not permitted to do it. It's interesting because I didn't know that, but we are in the 21st century and we are in the year 2021, and you are not going to college or school or anything. You are studying using your laptop, using your device or whatever, and you are not a you are not in a position that you can copy from your book. But there is something, because you are not with other students around you. You are not constantly being watched. Rather, you can have your book and you can give the examination. That's it. So that is why I said here, everything I learned in school is law for me, no changing of the teachings of my primary and high school teachers. Of course it is. For example, in that year, I learned about nature. They taught me that I should take care always about nature, about plants, about animals, and to do harm to animals and plants was something unacceptable in a modern society that we have now. They taught me that in 1991, and my generation, I speak for myself, we are more careful about uh, polluting the environment or doing harm to animals or plants. We are more careful. That's why you have several organizations talking and doing everything possible to preserve the environment, the planet. That's why I said my generation. We were more decent. We never talk about sex at school when I was 6. It was something that must be respected just for the parents. Just the parents had the right to talk with their children about sex. Okay? No homosexuality, not anything mentioned in my primary school. Okay? That is why I said everything has changed now. For the better, for the worse, I don't know. Depends on how you see it. The criminal law should be oriented to a minimum of intervention in the state-citizen relationship. There shouldn't be criminals in the street. like rich countries like Denmark, Finland, those countries, those European countries, very rich countries. I'm talking about very rich countries. They don't have criminals in their midst because they are rich. If there is someone poor, they would take care of that person. Or if there is a beggar, they would take care of that beggar. So in this case, in this country that I am, it's almost impossible to have minimum intervention of the state. Always, you always have the intervention of the state. It it aspires to a minimum of distressing dose, reduction of excessive penalties for less burdensome penalties. Good. In recent years, the national legislature has resorted to substantially increasing the penal ideas, rules, or beliefs. Good. So you can take note of the page. Oh, look at this individual. It is just an example. Okay? It's not criticism. It's not that I am against him or for him. Right now, he is respected. In the past, I used to criticize him. And right now, I find that several of the things that this man has said and has done are not appropriate. So let's see what I have to say about this man. With a marking intimidating purpose. Can you imagine the state with a marked intimidating purpose? Any country with that purpose? Which we know from the theory of punishment as the general negative prevention that is based on the state terror that is infused in the citizens through penalties. Have you heard this expression, state terror? That's why I put this picture. In 2017, several Pinoys torched a pic of Duterte, pronouncing very bad the word Duterte, which is a Spanish word. Obviously, they were supporters of communism. The word Duterte is a Spanish word and is pronounced Duterte. Okay, I repeat again, Duterte. They pronounced fascista dictador in a very bad way. Those are Spanish words. Repeat after me. Fascista dictador. That is the correct way. Fascista dictador. In 2016, he said to drug traffickers, "These sons of devil," he said sons of, but I wrote, "These sons of devil are destroying our children. Seriously, I'm going to murder all of you. I don't have patience or middle term." Imagine this statement of this person. Murder all of you. Many people would say, yes, it is allowed that he murdered all people involved in trading drugs. I tell you something, how can he be certain if a person really is a drug dealer? With 100% certainty that he is a drug dealer. let's move on. Whether they kill me or I kill them all, the European Parliament expressed concern by the high number of murders against suspected drug traffickers. Rodrigo Duterte replied to the European Parliament something that can't be written completely, but something like this: F you. I tell you my personal experience. In 2013, it was my first experience going to the prison. Visiting the prison would be the correct way. I'd never been sentenced to prison, never. I visited the prison in 2013 and I went to the women's pavilion. In that pavilion, I met several women, some of them innocent, but several of them guilty of bringing drugs here to the country. But I saw them, and believe me, these women were not bad. You may say you don't know them, but you know something you really learned through the years. I'm not a young man anymore. I told you in 1991 I was 6 years old. So how old I am now? Do the maths. But I met these people, and you learned through the passage of time to recognize good people from bad people, just looking into the eyes and listening to their words, how they say it, how they say the words, everything. And to my personal experience, I can tell you that they were not bad people. Some of them were deceived by other people. They were misled. They were desperate. So let's imagine that I am a foreigner and I've been deceived by someone, and I am completely innocent. But in my luggage, I have drugs planted by a criminal organization. What will happen to me if I go to Philippines? Are they going to kill me because I'm bringing drugs to the country? It is like this: if you go to the airport and a person may approach to you and he would say, please, can you take this package to Philippines? What if an old lady tell me that? I would say okay, because I'm innocent. But when I arrived Philippines, I realized that that package contains drugs. So what will happen to me? Am I going to be killed? And this is not the way that you should answer to people. Sorry to say. I would never answer that to anyone. I did once, but with a woman that told me the same thing. I still remember her. In this way, the penalty loses its special preventive resocializing effects. If the citizen is in constant fear that the punishment of the state is going to be so severe, what happens with resocializing? People don't like to live in fear. Believe me, People don't like it. What would be the result if all citizens are under terror state? Are we going to have happy people, outspoken people? Those are questions. I'm not affirming anything. This has been the criminal political trend that the state used to combat terrorism, drug trafficking, and crime. In Asia, in the Middle East, you have terrorism. In Europe, you also have terrorism coming from ideologies from other countries. What some of these political trend happened during terrorism here? For example, here we have an age of terrorism that it was in the 90s. No, sorry, part of the 80s and part of the 90s. We have people that were rebellious and they were supporters of the communist ideas. And we had bloodshed here in the country. It is a story that you may find in YouTube. Perhaps I would create a special video about that. But the thing is that, for example, to combat terrorism, what people did, judges covered their faces. They didn't want to show their faces. Why? Because if they were recognized by a terrorist, the terrorist would give instructions that their supporters would go against the family of the judge. We have that. You can Google it, you can search it. That was the political trend. Okay, let's move on. Criminal law and its exclusive protection of legal assets. Criminal law has been elevated to the category of a conflict-solving mechanism of major political and social problems. The criminal response is generally used to repress conduct outside its normal scope of application. Good. Take note, so we shall move. Picture of books. Let's analyze this. An orientation toward the guiding principles of criminal laws. The punitive power of the state must be crossed by the limits that the legal system imposes on it, so that the citizen is not left unprotected at the mercy of an excessive and arbitrary intervention. These limits are strongly guaranteed by both the excessive and arbitrary principle of the state. No less important is the principle of legality that is established as a true paradigm of the rule of law, which serves to avoid an arbitrary punishment based on an imprecise or retroactive law. We should be protected against abuse from the authority. When you really are into the parameters of the law, you are not expected to be persecuted. That is why we have here people who can defend you. And I explained that in the previous video that I told you about Peru. And we have experience here of the government being excessively unfair to judge people. We have government at the beginnings of the 80s, not being abusive to the people, but with the policies abusive to the way of living of the citizens here in Peru. Search the Peruvian government starting in 1985 to 1990, and you would see the situation right now happening in Venezuela that happened in Peru in those years. Ooh, we've got millions and millions of currency. In that time, the currency was Inti, and that currency was so low against the dollar, so low. Well, I was a baby in those years. I would investigate even more about the subject. But I hope I give you an idea of what is criminal law in your own country. I talk about the perspective of my country, but what about your country? You can let me know in the comments. Again, I'm not an expert, I'm not a professional, I'm not a college student, I'm just a rank and file citizen. Okay? Thank you very much for being so far in the video. Have a nice day.